There is something I need you to hear before anything else, and I need you to hear it not with the part of your mind that is already composing a response, not with the part of you that is rehearsing an explanation, not with the part of you that is quietly hoping this is going to tell you what you most want to believe. I need you to hear it with the part of you that already knows, the part that is tired, the part that has been working so hard for so long to understand someone else's behavior that it has almost forgotten what it feels like to simply know your own. Your person is desperately trying to tell you something. That part is true, but what they are telling you and what you have been hearing may be two entirely different things. And the distance between those two things is where you have been living, and it is time to come home. Carl Jung wrote something that most people quote without fully feeling. He said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." He was not talking about destiny in the comfortable sense. He was not talking about forces beyond your control arranging themselves on your behalf. He was talking about the terrifying and liberating truth that the patterns repeating in your life, in your relationships, in the specific kind of person you find yourself drawn to again and again, those patterns are not accidents and they are not fate. They are the unconscious speaking. They are the parts of yourself you have not yet brought into the light, running the whole operation from underneath. So let me ask you something quietly, and I want you to sit with it rather than answering too quickly, because the first answer that comes is almost never the real one. How long have you been trying to understand this person? Not days, probably not even weeks. I'm guessing months, possibly longer, of reading their behavior, analyzing their words, interpreting their silences, constructing theories about what they actually feel versus what they are showing, what they want versus what they are saying, who they could be versus who they are being right now. I am guessing you have given enormous amounts of mental and emotional energy to the project of figuring them out, and I am guessing that despite all of that effort, you still do not feel certain. You still do not feel settled. You still find yourself back at the beginning of the same question on a different Tuesday at a different hour, asking the same thing with a slightly different angle, hoping this time the answer will finally feel solid. Here is what Jung would want you to notice about that. Not about him, about you. The unconscious has a way of showing us what we are not yet ready to see directly. It shows us through patterns, through repetition, through the specific emotional experiences it keeps recreating in our outer lives until we finally turn and face whatever they are pointing to inside us. And one of the ways it does this most effectively is through the people we become most intensely focused on. The people we cannot stop analyzing. The people whose behavior we study with more rigor and care and attention than we have ever given to our own inner world. Because as long as we are consumed with understanding them, we are not required to understand ourselves. And that, more often than we realize, is exactly the point. This is what Jung meant by projection, not a dismissal of your feelings, not a suggestion that what you feel is invented or unreal. He meant something far more precise and far more important. He meant that the qualities we find most magnetic, most disturbing, most impossible to release in another person are almost always qualities that have deep roots in our own psyche. The things that hold our attention most powerfully in the outside world are the things our inner world most urgently needs us to examine. So when you cannot stop thinking about whether he truly cares, whether his distance means something, whether his returns are significant, whether his silence is hiding a feeling he cannot name, the question Jung would ask is not what is happening inside him. The question is, what does your need to know reveal about what is happening inside you? And I want to stay here for a moment, because this is the part that most conversations about relationships completely skip. They focus entirely on decoding the other person. They give you frameworks for understanding why he pulls away, why he goes hot and cold, why he says one thing and does another. And those frameworks may be accurate. He may indeed be frightened of intimacy. He may be carrying wounds that make closeness feel dangerous. He may be divided within himself in exactly the ways you sense he is. All of that may be true, but none of it explains why you are still there. None of it explains why his uncertainty has become your consuming focus. None of it explains why you have organized so much of your emotional life around interpreting someone who, by the very definition of the situation, is not giving you clear information to work with. That is the question that leads somewhere real. Not what is he trying to tell you, but what is your response to him trying to tell you about yourself? Because here is what I have noticed about women who find themselves in this particular kind of emotional limbo. The kind where someone is inconsistent and confusing and somehow impossible to release. These are not naive women. These are not women who lack intelligence or self-awareness. These are often the most emotionally perceptive, psychologically attuned, genuinely caring women in any room. Women who feel deeply and think carefully and love with extraordinary wholeness. Women who are, paradoxically, most at risk for this specific kind of attachment, because their capacity to feel and to understand and to see potential in people is exactly the quality that gets weaponized, even unconsciously, by someone who is not yet capable of meeting them. The deep feeler falls hardest for the person who seems to need her depth to save them. The woman who is extraordinarily empathic becomes most attached to the person whose emotional complexity seems to require her empathy to decode. The woman who longs to be truly seen finds herself most riveted by the person who seems almost capable of seeing her, but keeps looking away at the last moment. These are not coincidences. These are the unconscious organizing your outer life around an inner story it is trying to complete. And the inner story is almost never about him specifically. It is almost always about something much older, something that was written before he arrived. Jung described what he called the anima and animus, the inner feminine and inner masculine that live within each of us. For a woman, the animus is the internalized image of masculine energy. It is not simply the image of a man. It is a composite built over years of what masculine presence has meant to her emotionally, what it felt like, what it required of her, what it gave and what it withheld. This image is formed earliest and most powerfully in childhood through the first masculine presence in her life. Her father, his absence, his emotional availability, or the precise shape of his unavailability. And then it is refined through every significant experience of masculine energy that followed. Here is the uncomfortable and important truth. Many women carry an animus image that was formed through a masculine presence that was wonderful but inconsistent, present sometimes and withdrawn without explanation, warm and then suddenly distant, someone who loved her genuinely, but whose love arrived with an uncertainty that she could not control or predict. And she adapted to that love. She became expert at reading the shifts in it, at earning the warmth, at managing herself carefully so as not to trigger the withdrawal. She became, without knowing it, an expert at loving at a distance, at hoping, at interpreting, at finding meaning in the moments of closeness that made the uncertainty worthwhile. And then she grew up, and she began to choose partners. And her nervous system, which does not distinguish between familiar and safe, kept recognizing in certain men the emotional signature it knew how to respond to. The signature of someone who is genuinely compelling but not quite fully available. The signature of someone who gives just enough to keep the bond alive but not enough to make her feel truly secure. The signature of love that is real but requires her to work for it, to earn it, to decipher it, to wait for it. And she called that feeling chemistry. She called it connection. She called it the sense that this one was different. And she was not lying. That is genuinely what it felt like. But what she was feeling, in part, was the deep and cellular recognition of a pattern that her system knew how to inhabit. A pattern that felt like home because it was the emotional home she was first built in. And home, even when it is painful, feels like truth to the nervous system. This is what your person is desperately trying to tell you, not with their words, and not even really with their behavior. The whole dynamic, the push and pull, the closeness and withdrawal, the hope and the confusion, and the inability to fully let go is trying to tell you something. It is trying to say, here is a pattern you know. Here is the shape of love your nervous system recognizes. Here is where your unfinished emotional work lives. Are you ready to see it? Because here is what changes when you are willing to look at it that way. The question stops being about him, and it becomes about you in the most empowering possible sense, not in the self-blaming sense of what did I do wrong or why am I not enough for him to choose differently. In the sense of, what is this pattern showing me about what I have been accepting as love? What am I still carrying from before he existed that is making his particular kind of unavailability feel like such a powerful, magnetic pull? What part of me is still trying to complete an old story through a new person? Because you cannot complete an old story through a new person. Jung was absolutely clear on this. The work of individuation, of becoming whole, of integrating the parts of yourself that have been operating in the dark, that work cannot be outsourced to a relationship. A relationship can catalyze it. It can create the conditions in which the work becomes impossible to avoid. But no person, no matter how much they love you or how deeply they connect with you, can do for you what you have to do in your own inner life. And the inverse is also true. You cannot do it for him. Here is something I want you to sit with. You have been spending significant emotional energy wondering whether he thinks about you, whether you cross his mind, whether his feelings are real beneath the behavior. And I want to gently ask you this. What would change for you if you knew for certain that the answer was yes? If you had absolute confirmation that he thinks of you, that the feelings are real, that his distance is entirely about his own fear and nothing about his actual desire for you, what would change? For many women, the honest answer, the one underneath the first answer, is not very much. Because the knowledge that he feels it, but cannot show up for it, does not actually solve the problem. It does not give her the relationship she wants. It does not give her the security she needs. It does not give her the consistent, present, choosing love that she deserves. It only gives her permission to keep waiting, to keep hoping, to keep organizing her emotional life around someone who has, regardless of his internal experience, not yet chosen to be there. And that permission, as comforting as it feels, is also a trap. Because the story that says he loves me but is too frightened to show it can be true and still leave you alone. The story that says his distance is about his wounds and not about your worth can be psychologically accurate and still not be enough to build a life on. The compassionate understanding of why someone is the way they are does not obligate you to accept that they cannot be different. Compassion is not the same as waiting indefinitely for someone to become ready for a love they keep showing you they are not currently able to hold. Jung spoke of the shadow not just as the darkness in others, but as the unintegrated parts of ourselves. And one of the most important shadow elements for many women in this kind of dynamic is the part that believes she is not quite enough for straightforward love. The part that believes love has to be complicated to be real. The part that believes if it comes easily, if a man is clear and consistent and genuinely available, it must mean the depth is not there. The part that has learned to associate the ache of uncertainty with the feeling of being truly alive in a relationship. That belief lives in the shadow precisely because it is too painful to look at directly. It is much more comfortable to focus on his behavior, his fears, his wounds, his potential. It is much more comfortable to be the woman who understands him than to be the woman who examines why she needs him to be understood by her specifically. But the shadow does not stay hidden forever. Jung was clear on this. What we refuse to face in ourselves will continue appearing in our outer lives, wearing different faces, repeating the same emotional dynamic until we finally turn toward it. So, here is what your person is desperately trying to tell you. through the dynamic itself, through the push and pull, through the hope and the confusion and the waiting. They are not primarily communicating something about their feelings for you. They are serving, perhaps unknowingly, as a mirror. And the mirror is showing you where you still have a story to revise, where you still have a wound to honor, where you still have a belief to examine about what love looks like when it is real, about what you deserve to ask for, about what you are allowed to require. The bravest thing you can do right now is not to wait for him to finally say what you have been hoping to hear. The bravest thing is to say to yourself what you have been hoping he would say to you. You matter. What you feel is real and worth honoring. You deserve a love that does not require a decoder. You deserve presence that does not need to be earned back repeatedly. You deserve the version of connection that feels like landing, not like bracing for impact. And here is the deepest truth, the one that Jung spent his entire life pointing people toward. The love you have been searching for in him is not something he has and is withholding. It is something you have and have been outsourcing. The feeling of being chosen, of being seen, of being worth staying for. Those are not feelings that can be permanently installed in you by another person's decision. They are feelings that grow from the inside, slowly, through the daily practice of choosing yourself with the same loyalty and clarity and depth that you have been offering to someone who could not yet receive it. You are not waiting for him to make a decision. You have already been given all the information you need. The only decision that actually changes your life is the one you make about yourself, about what you are willing to accept, about what you are finally ready to release, about what kind of love you are going to stop explaining away and start actually requiring. That is what all of this has been pointing you toward, not to him and whatever he is or is not feeling, to you, to the extraordinary, perceptive, deeply feeling woman who has been pouring her best self into understanding someone else and who is now being invited, perhaps for the first time, to pour that same quality of attention inward, to understand herself, to choose herself, to finally become the person she has been waiting for someone else to see. That is the message your person has been desperately trying to tell you. And now that you have heard it, the question is simply what you do with it.